Well, we have a very special guest today, Dr. Rahul Sharma, who is the founder of Funkadesi, sharing a special improvisational live musical piece on the sitar, as well as asking the question, how do we insist that we all belong? Sharing his double migration story in his family and lineage. And here he talks about being an artist, a self-absorbed and selfless endeavor, and shares his chai recipe, which is not a tea recipe, but a concoction for how to be in life. Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Embody Podcast, a show about remembering and embodying your true nature, inner wisdom, embodied healing, and self-love. My name is Candace Wu, and I'm a holistic healing facilitator, intuitive coach, and artist sharing my personal journey of vulnerability, offering meditations and guided healing support, and having co-creative conversations with healers and wellness practitioners from all over the world. This episode is sponsored by the Embodied Healing Group that happens once a month. This is a special group for 2 to 4 people online that want to have soul and body support through the month. Whether you're yearning to get in touch with your deeper inner wisdom or have some healing with the pieces that are challenging in your life, or to strengthen your vision and what you're going towards in your life, this group might be for you. So feel free to check it out at candacewu.com/Patreon. You can also find the links in the show notes that are connected to this episode at candacewu.com/Rahul, Rahul. It's a real pleasure to have Dr. Rahul Sharma on the show today. Dr. Sharma is one of my previous professors at the Illinois School of Professional Psychology, where I studied clinical psychology. When I was in school, I really admired the way he was able to talk about the difficult things, talk about power and equality, what was happening in the room with each of us in terms of how we felt, what aspects of us and our identity were coming into the storyline of who we were in that room or how we felt in life. And he created a very safe space with music, with drumming, with bringing in other ways of connecting that support a universal connecting on the soul level, on the heart level, that I really admired. Rahul is an accomplished and passionate consultant, artist, experiential learning innovator, psychologist, and expert in the areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, leadership, and growth. His biggest focus is the recognition of the need to create space, unique spaces for people to grow, produce, and flourish, and to find their own creative voice as well. I have always felt supported in his presence and his invitation for all of the parts of us to show up, for all of us to belong in the space together, and for our inner parts of us to come forward to the table as a valuable part of us is so healing. So grab a tea or coffee or something lovely to drink, a chai perhaps, as you tune into this episode on his sharing of his recipe for chai, and enjoy this music and this lovely experience that can bring you in touch with your beauty, your artistry, your sense of belonging, or your heart's aching for belonging, and the insistence of life that we are all belonging, the insistence that we are all human and have a place. So I hope this episode inspires you just as it did for me and gives you a connection with more of yourself. Well, this episode is coming at a very poignant time for me because I'm stepping into more enjoyment of beauty and feeling the wholeness of beauty, not just the pleasure, not just the good things as we might label them, the things that are pleasurable to experience, but the wholeness of life, finding the beauty in all of the experience, all of the challenging, sad, upsetting, angering, as well as pleasurable and delightful, joyful, blissful feelings, holding that all with the sense of amusement and play and treasuring the moment is the beauty that I'm after. And this episode with Rahul is truly inspiring to me right now because I'm also stepping into more of my own artistry to allow my inner artist to capture and receive inspiration and let that flow through me. Let that have its own life. And it's just so inspiring to hear Rahul's story as well as his music and to hear the roots and the intentions behind his music. It's very exciting. Hey, Rahul.
Hey there.
Welcome to the show. This is really an honor. I don't know how this conversation is going to go. Uh,
I hope it goes well. I
I
hope
hope so
well.
too. I can't imagine it not. I just am so curious about what's going to open up. And you have your sitar there with you.
Yes, I do.
I guess we'll just start by introducing you a little bit. And right now, I'll just say that you are my previous professor and now a colleague. And you are an artist, a consultant, a speaker, psychologist. And what I have loved about our interactions is the feeling of inclusiveness that I have around you and the recognition of just all these different parts of ourselves in one space together. And many interactions of you bringing your artistry to the healing work and the therapy work that you were teaching me and other students, like bringing in drum circles and just opening up these parts of who you are. So, welcome. I just wanted to start with a piece of how I know you.
Oh, that's very sweet, and I'm really glad to get that feedback that was coming across, sort of how much my identity and just what I bring in terms of the art comes through, even when I'm teaching clinical psychology. Because for me, those are very integrated.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'd like to start with something that really caught me when I was reading a little bit into your bio is that your story sounds like your family ancestry and lineage story of double migration
Hmm.
really informs how you show up in the world and your work. And I'd love to hear that story as much or as little as you want to share here.
Oh, thank you for asking. So yeah, my ethnic heritage is Punjabi. So both my ancestry on both sides, my father's side and my mother's side, originally comes from Punjab, Jammu Kashmir in northern India.
Mhm.
And my father's father wrote down his life story the year I was born. And when for me, as somebody who identifies as Indian American, a lot of Indian Americans go back to India if they have the means every year, every 2 years, every 3 years. And for me, it was going back to Kenya, sometimes 3 to 6 months at a time growing up. The best part being
Mm.
missing loads of school. And so, yeah, that was quite enjoyable. But you know, it wasn't till 1992 I graduated college and I went to India for the first time. And I also got a hold of my grandfather's life story that he had written, like I was saying, when the year I was born. The stories just blew me away. And so, if I may, I'd like to share the story of my grandfather.
I would love to hear it. Yeah.
So, growing up in rural Punjab with the British having colonized India and Kenya, he didn't see any economic prospects for him. In fact, growing up in the village, he didn't even have a primary education. So one day he's visiting a classroom and he must be maybe 10 years old. And the schoolmaster sees my father and sees that he's standing in this classroom with these younger boys in class. So he assumed, my grandfather must be from a later grade and asked the boys to ask him a question. my grandfather didn't know the answer, and the boy started laughing. And my grandfather came home and he was incredibly humiliated. And his parents, my great grandparents, were so hurt to see him like that. They pleaded with the school, can we find a way
Mm.
to give him a basic education? So he started going to school.
Mm.
Fast forward a few years, he hears about a distant relative that had found some economic prospect working as an indentured servant for the British on the railway in East Africa. So he was set. This is what I'm going to do. And his parents were against it. They were against it. And he just was determined to go. So the day he was leaving, my great grandparents took him to a remote part of the village where they had kept their ancestral savings, and it must have been like $1.50, like very little money, but they gave it all to him and
Mhm.
said, "Go, you have our blessing. Just,
Oh,
wishing you the best."
wow.
So he ends up working for a Sikh fuel contractor,
Okay.
and Bishan Singh is the guy's name. And one day, my grandfather and some other laborers are walking across the railway, and they're stopped by a British military officer, Captain McStead. And my understanding is and this is my recollection from reading this story, is that Captain McStead said, "Hey, I want you all to work for the military. We'll pay you better." And my grandfather said, "Well, we can't. Um, we're under contract to work for Bishan Singh, and for 3 years."
Mhm.
And this military officer was infuriated, and he said, "I demand to see this Bishan Singh."
Mm.
And of course, Bishan Singh hadn't done anything wrong. He just had this contract. But I think
Yeah.
that this British military officer just, like, who is this guy to sort of get in my way? So in the public square,
Mhm.
he grabbed Bishan Singh by the beard and shook him violently and just abused him in public. And Bishan Singh was so freaked out that he just, didn't want to be seen in public after that. So soon afterwards, the Germans blow up a portion of the railway, and this Captain McStad blames Bishan Singh, my grandfather, and all the laborers of harboring with the enemy. And they round up all of them. Three of my grandfather's friends are shot. They're executed without a trial. And my grandfather was lucky where he got, there was a change in the chief magistrate, the judge. And so my grandfather got a trial. And these military officers stopped my grandfather and said, "Look, some of your friends are already dead. Why don't you just say you guys did it? If you say anything else, we'll kill
Oh,
you." So my grandfather gets into the courtroom and he says, "These people want me to put innocent Indian names to shame, and I'll never do it. You can do whatever you want with me, but I'll never
wow.
do it." And then a doctor stood up and testified saying, "I don't think we can kill him. He doesn't even look like he's 18 years old." And so what they did was they
Ugh.
sentenced my grandfather to 10 years hard labor. And he ended up serving 3 and got out after 3 years. So
Wow.
that was obviously just reading that and realizing what my grandfather had gone through, and then eventually made his way from the coast of Kenya to Nairobi to work, open up his grocery store, and was able to send my father and a couple of his siblings to England for schooling. And that's where my father got his PhD, had met my mother. My mother was pursuing science and they were living in Nairobi. My father was lecturing at the University of Nairobi, and my sisters were born there. And a guy comes up to my father, says, "How would you like a job at Western Michigan University?" And my father
Mm.
was like, "Let's go, let's do this." So my brother and I were born in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And as I sometimes tell my students, my sisters were born in Nairobi and I was born in
Mhm.
Kalamazoo, and I'll never forgive my sisters for that. Not to knock the Midwest, but my personal opinion is it's a little bit cooler to be born in Nairobi. But seriously, that's
Yeah.
just that legacy and that history, that's a part of, and then of course, me growing up in a different era in the Midwest, but also realizing that I come from this family background where this is our ethnic history, but also this is where we relocated to, and just interacting with different people through these different experiences helped to form my interests and the way I, as you say, show up in the world.
Mhm. Wow, that's a really incredible story. How did you feel when you read it, your grandpa's story? That just sounds like such a really interesting experience, not everyone has a piece of writing from their ancestor.
Yeah. Well, it was an incredible feeling. And by the way, I don't know if you can hear the dog barking at the mailman in the
I
background.
can a little.
Yeah. It's
Yep,
not
it's all
you.
right.
It's not your question. I just want to assure you that. But well, one of the things well, obviously that had a huge impact on me, just that story, and just thinking about the, like, what if those kids hadn't laughed at my grandfather, and my grandfather didn't get that education? Would I be born in
Mhm.
India? Would I not have existed because the stars didn't align that way? What happened? Obviously, we know what would happen if my grandfather had been executed. But that palpable awareness about you know uh, issues of oppression in my relatively recent family history, I think that's had a big impact on me. But also, I was reading this at a time, Candace, when I was going through my own identity crisis because being born and raised
Mm.
in Kalamazoo, Michigan, I think our family has always had a strong identity of being proud of who we are and proud of our uniqueness and what we bring to the table. But at the same time, I think I grew up in an era and in a way where I didn't embrace thinking of myself as a person of color, or didn't think consciously about how issues of race were impacting me in the way I thought about myself. So, this story meant so much in terms of, oh, yeah, I'm not from the United States. My history, my people's
Yeah.
history is really rich. And there's a lot of, you know, really intense, tragic stories. There's some amazing stories. And the thing is, my grandfather visited Hardwar, which is where they have for generations the most elaborate bookkeeping of genealogy. You just name the village you're from, and they would
Mm.
bring out books, and they would, list your ancestry. Of course, it's
Oh,
patriarchal,
fascinating.
so it was a lot of male names. But because of the year my
Mhm.
grandfather wrote this down, our actual family clan name is Punj, not Sharma. So they're
Oh,
listing
yeah.
my ancestors like Asa Punj, Diala Punj, Ishar Punj, Jahawar Lal Punj,
Mhm.
Lal Chand Punj. And the last name in that
Mhm.
list of 9 generations was my name. And so
Oh,
that, you can imagine just staring at that manuscript. I was like, whoa, the ninth generation
yeah.
of this
Phew.
incredible list. So that just rocked me to my core.
That feels so powerful and, uh, I don't know, opening.
Yeah, it definitely created spaces in me and it really, I think, fueled my sense of purpose, and solidified what direction I was going in from college to beyond college.
Wow. What a huge transformation because it's so a part of you now, your heritage, who you are, your ethnicity, the culture,
Absolutely.
at least from where I'm standing.
Yeah, no, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And one of the ways in which because I had that moment where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not from the United States, and I realized that nobody would really fuss if I just kind of forgot my where I came from. Like, my
Mhm.
nightmare scenario was having great grandchildren that would one day say, "Oh yeah, yeah, one of my ancestors was Indian, not the feather kind, the dot kind."
Mm.
and
Yeah.
that sort of snapshot terrified me. So I said, I need to take it upon myself to um, know where I come from. And, I played music in high school and in college, so bass guitar, and mainly blues, funk, starting to get into reggae a little bit. And then I thought, what better way to reconnect with my culture than with music? So I picked up first the tabla when I visited India for the first time, was studying tabla, which is the Indian percussion instrument. And then I gravitated towards sitar, which is North Indian stringed instrument, which I'm holding right now.
Yeah. Would you like to play a little
Oh
something?
my gosh, I thought you'd never ask. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I would
I'm
I
just
would love
waiting
to
for it.
play. Yeah,
I just can't wait.
all right. So, just to set it up, it's a very, like I love playing bass guitar. I love playing guitar, and I think bass guitar brings out the funk in me. The acoustic guitar brings out
Yeah.
the country western twang in me. I sort of like another aspect of my identity because I did grow up here. And but the
Mhm.
sitar sort of, allows me to express myself in a different way. So if it's all right, I'm just gonna do a little improv. I don't know what I'm gonna play yet, because part of the whole thing about sitar, it's an improvisatory musical form. The only thing is you kind of need to stick within the set of notes that you're, deciding upon playing. So the improvisation
Mhm.
works best when it stays within the rag, the structure. And I almost think of it like a spirit, or as the great Amjad Ali Khan, Ustad Amjad Ali Khan said in a radio interview, a rag is like a personality. And he says, I wish I could live more than one lifetime because it would take more than one lifetime to truly express the depth of just one rag, which I thought was like,
Ooh.
that was mind blowing. So, in my humble way, I don't know what I'm going to share, but this is for your Embody podcast inspired by what we're talking about right now.
was beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, I loved it. It was just delightful. I feel so at peace right now.
Nap time.
Right? Yep, my eyes were closing. I was just like swaying my
Oh.
body. And now, as you mentioned the Raag, I remember you talking about that in grad school and the
Mhm.
personality of it. And how do you tune into what's the right Raag or sense into that when you begin?
Well, that's such a great question because, from an Indian classical perspective, they say that these rags correspond to different times of the day, different seasons. This rag should only be played between this time and this time of the day. And they say it's scientifically based, that the frequencies were determined this way. But then I
Mhm.
asked myself, well, if I'm living in Chicago, and I asked this of a Indian classical musician at a question and answer, you know,
Mhm.
and these rags were formed in India. Did they translate across the world? Do I play the rag that was supposed to be played early morning in India when it's early morning here, or am I supposed to do it at the time zone it was in India? So all of that's to say, I think there is something to it, but I also think studying other forms of music like blues and jazz and reggae and everything, there's an authentic frequency. Like, for example,
Mm.
jazz musicians have a different set of guidelines. So when you have a jazz musician jamming with an Indian musician, one of them is really sticking within this melodic structure. And then the Indian musician, the jazz musician is kind of breaking some of those rules, but sticking to other guidelines, right?
Right.
And both of these art forms are valid. So, and to me, that's the band that I started over 22 years ago. That's been sort of our dialogue between each other. Our dialectic is how do we create something that feels authentic if we're crossing genres and not all of the rules line up?
Ooh.
Is there a deeper type of authenticity
Yeah.
that can be maintained? And so, anyway, this long, and look, this is what happens when you have a psychologist for a musician. I pontificate and and why use 5 words when I can use 500?
Right?
Um, which is why Carlos, our beloved conga player, always reminds me, less talk, more rock.
Uh,
So
yeah.
I try to live by that sometimes, but most of the time I fail.
Well,
Um,
I'm feeling
but
with you.
but
Excuse me. I'm feeling with
oh,
you
good.
because
Oh, good.
my
Good.
mind just went into like Ayurveda. And, when you were saying like
Oh,
the time
yeah.
zones,
Yeah.
and then I was like in my mind trying to sync up with like the different meridians of the body and the energy channels and timing of the day and the doshas. Is that something that's in that in alignment?
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. To give you a different answer to the question, I
Mhm.
think, and this is where I do think my interest in psychology comes into play. And like to me, improvising as an artist, it's this balance between what am I feeling? So a very personal and in a way self-absorbed kind of what's going to do it for me? What do I want to express? Combined with a sensitivity and a sensibility about what is needed in the moment.
Mm.
What's the tone that needs to be struck? Which to me requires attention to the environment, attention to um, not only what's happening inside yourself, but if you're playing with other musicians, what is their vibe and how can you complement each other?
Mhm.
Or if you're sitting in front of an audience, we played at City Winery last night, and we did the same thing where we did some improvisation. We didn't know what we were going to be playing until we played it. Part of it was, what's my sense of what the room needs right now? So I've always been struck by that combination of like being an artist in some ways is simultaneously a very self-absorbed and very selfless endeavor.
Yeah, that really makes sense to me. And with both this and the other piece of what you're saying, how do you blend the different sounds and the perhaps rules of that sound genre or artistry so that there's some common or some sort of amalgamation of it. And this just lines up with the whole theme of Funkadesi, insisting we all belong. One family.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Wow,
it
you
was
do
right
your
on your
homework.
website, and I was like, "That's beautiful."
Yeah.
Like, that is absolutely what I
Yeah.
see and feel when I
Aw.
haven't been to your concert yet, but I've seen you guys on YouTube, and it just feels like that.
Mm. Yeah, so I would say this, that piece kinda ties in with what, I've been calling my chai recipe. I always tell people, "Look, I'm Indian, I gotta represent, so I'm gonna share with you my
Nice.
chai recipe." And then I thoroughly disappoint people when I let them know that chai is actually just an acronym. So it's CHAI. And to me, it's compassion, humility, accountability, and insistence.
Mm,
So, and I've been reflecting on this as things that can be helpful for us as healers in psychology, but also, especially when we're thinking about issues of diversity and social justice. Obviously, compassion, guided by that phrase by Wendy Mass: "Be kind, for everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about."
mhm,
Right? And I think when we never fully understand another person's context, but there's a lot
mhm,
that happens when we lead with compassion. And the H is humility. Humility to me is sorely missing in a lot of spaces, in my humble opinion. Uh, I think people get defensive when they feel like they're being taken down a notch. Well, who are you to say X about me? Who are you to call me out on this? And I think there's some validity to that. We're living in an era, well, not even just now, but I was at University of Michigan in the era of identity
mm,
politics when it was in its heyday. And even then, and now there's this sense of, well, this is what's wrong with you. This is what you need to be doing. Social media really exacerbates that. And I participate in that sometimes. And and then I don't like myself afterwards where it's like, man, how much of this was me really just
right.
needing to take this person down a notch,
Yeah.
you know? So to me, the humility is, are you as willing to hold yourself accountable to the same degree that you're expecting someone else to
Mm,
be accountable to you? To me, that's the humility. And of course that jumps right into the next one.
mhm,
A is accountability. That phrase that we talk about a
right.
lot, intent versus impact. When interacting with somebody, are you more focused on your intentions and trying to defend your intentions? Or are you able to clear yourself out and hold yourself accountable to the impact you had on other people? So I think
Yeah.
that's another piece of it. And then that last part, which once again, it was my long-winded way of responding to your thing about like insisting. So that to me, the I is the
Insistence.
insistence. Yeah, it's like, yeah. Wait a minute, what was that question? Oh yeah.
Yeah, I thought I was gonna get a cup of tea here, like a little recipe for a cup of tea.
Yeah, where's that? By the way, I make a kick-ass cup of chai as well, so there's always that option as well.
There's always that for next time,
Yeah, there's the next
you
time.
know? I have a cup of water here, it's not quite the same.
That's so funny. But so the insistence is like, it's nice to be compassionate, it's nice to be humble, but we are living in a world with unjust systems are always in operation. And that whole thing is like, it's not possible to be a non-racist. You need to be anti-racist, because to recognize that racism is operating at every level, it's so important that
Mhm.
you are active in saying that, like, if you're silent and you're like, oh well, I'm just going to keep my head down, or I'm going to make sure I don't say or do bad things, that's not enough. So insistence can mean a few things, but one thing is insisting on speaking to things that need to be spoken to. Sometimes, nobody brings up that might be sexist, that might be homophobic, that might be whatever. And it's that silence that sort of ends up colluding with this unequal power system and keeps
Mhm.
things the way they are. So to me, the insistence is like, you can sometimes you got to make sure you put things on the table, or you make sure that you keep things on the table when they need to be addressed. So insisting on each other's full humanity. I mean, I could go off on this whole thing, but like, I think about one of the insidious ways, and I will apparently. The
Yeah.
One of the insidious ways in which oppression operates, in my observation, is that some people get the default benefit of full humanity, right? Whiteness, maleness, heterosexuality, all of these things where you're in the center of that power structure, right? And again, I'm not talking
Mhm.
about particular individuals, I'm talking about systems of privilege. And I think it's invisible to many of us, right? That this sense of,
Yeah.
well, of course, so and so gets the benefit of complexity and full humanity. So to me, the insistence is insisting on that full humanity for everybody.
I think that's so important, and, we hear about compassion a lot. Not
Hmm.
not to, like, I love this combination of chai here. Um, Humility, a little less so, but
It's delicious.
right, it's delicious. Accountability, we hear of that a lot, but insistence, I don't it's not something that's just quite present to me, but actually it has been lately. And now that you bring it up, it reminds me of my time in Ireland recently, last January, um, or this January, where I was working with horses very closely and
Mm,
not riding, but working with horsemanship and leadership with horses and interaction with them. And insistence came up a lot. And I bring this up now because it was such a challenging thing if I maybe got a little activated or something wasn't on the inside was happening for me to insist on something in the interaction with the horse, but also be responsive to what the horse was bringing and how they
mhm.
were and not lose sight of what I was insisting on. And then also adjusting if the insistence was too much, like
Right.
5 steps ahead of where we were, but insisting on something to be learned.
Absolutely. It sounds like, yeah, mutual accountability. I mean, you know,
Mhm.
saying what it is that you need to say, or indicating what you need to indicate, but also leaving space for what you're getting back.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's a really challenging thing. This is just what I'm seeing, especially on social media, where we might be holding each other accountable, but doing it in a way that's just repeating the cycle of the hurt, maybe coming with like an attack, or it may be
Hmm.
perceived as an attack. It's so challenging.
It's challenging. When I hear
Mhm.
you say that, it makes me think, which is a whole other conversation, but a model that I find very helpful in both just general psychology work, but also in thinking about the complexities of diversity, social justice issues, is the
Mhm.
internal family systems model.
Yes, I wanted to talk to you about that.
Yeah. So, but hearing you say that, Candace, there is a language, or I should say a process we can follow where you acknowledge that you have different parts of
Mhm.
yourselves of yourself, and each of us do. And how do you take responsibility for those parts without having to feel like that one part of you is the sum total of you,
Mhm.
you know? So how do you communicate that a part of you is feeling hurt, a part of you is feeling angry, part of you is feeling attacked by another person? And, I find this helpful. Just this morning was doing couples work where that was a part of what we were doing, was being able to acknowledge that we have different parts of ourselves. And how do you communicate through that? And again, according to the model, compassion is one of the key ingredients.
Isn't it such a relief to be able to communicate that way? It's because when we say, I don't know, I'm feeling X, Y, or Z, it's just much more complex than that. And to feel like we have to be all in one. basket like that is just so reducing because we have all these different parts of us that is such a relief to say, oh, this one part is feeling this, but this one is not, or this one is feeling something else. And it just opens up the whole thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to go back to belonging because I think it's such a beautiful thing that you're bringing forward and your band is bringing forward. You have the question that you carry, how do we increase a sense of belonging to each other? And what have you found? What
Mhm.
in your experience has been supportive to that? I know it's a big question. It's like,
Yeah. No, well, hey, look, the band's been together over 22
yes. So what
years,
have you found
and,
in
there's
22 years?
what have we found? So, yes, I can tell you. I'll tell you this. Well, I had nothing yet. Candace, I'm waiting till year 23. No, I'm just kidding. Give us
Okay,
one
no
more year.
problem.
But
Compassion,
I think
humility.
yeah. So exactly, exactly. But, I would say I think there's been this shared vibe amongst members of the band. And of course, a part of me, there we go with our parts. A part of
Mhm.
me would love to take all the credit for this. And I will say I feel like yeah, there's definitely some things that I saw as priorities and a tone that I wanted to set. But to be honest, I got so much more, something so much bigger from each band member, which was amazing. But I think this shared sense of we're gonna accept if I come from my Indian context, someone else comes from African American, Jamaican, Latino, whatever, cultural context, this recognition that, you know what, I am not going to second guess the wisdom of your cultural
Ooh,
context. I'm going, in fact, not only am I going to tolerate it, not only am I going to accept it, but I am going to cherish it. I'm going to embrace it as something that, I don't want to co opt it. I don't want to, appropriate it, but I want to affirm you and what you're bringing and your artistic self is bringing to the table. And we do that through music, and I think it's allowed a band of 10 people to stay together
mhm.
22 plus years. Is whoever wants to stop something that feels so affirming. I think there's something about what happens when you don't feel like you have to leave a part of yourself at the door when you come to the table? To get a seat at the table, you need to leave a part of your identity behind.
Yeah.
To me, Funkadesi is a musical embodiment of, and I always talk about this, if we're on stage and all of a sudden the two, Maninder and Inder in the band start singing a Punjabi song and it wasn't part of what we were doing before, to see the rest of the band's natural inclination to just like drop what they're doing and support that and is just it's a beautiful thing.
That is beautiful.
So I think there's a space, yeah, there's a space where we just we affirm each other. We affirm each other's cultural context. We accept each other as kin. That's why that phrase "one family, many children" is there.
Beautiful.
So I would say that's one
Mhm.
thing that we learn.
I love it.
I came across an article recently, I think on LinkedIn, that had a really compelling model, which was saying instead of a circle when we create a community, how about a U shape? Because a U shape leaves room for more people to come in, whereas a circle might be intimidating to
Mm.
some people. And I just immediately thought of the band,
Yeah.
and so I was thinking about it and talking with band members last night and came up with this notion like enroll in Funkadesi U. It's shaped like a U because you are welcome.
Oh.
I know it's a little cheesy. I try to sneak that in there.
That's great. But it fits.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say last night we were sound checking for our show, and there's an Indian woman that's
Mhm.
I think she was friends or she either worked at City Winery or she was friends with one of the people that was working there. And she's just like in a daze, just walking to the stage and just like I think her spirit just leapt out and she just said, "You don't know how much I need this. This sounds like home to me." And the fact that we're able to do that
Mm.
people of many different backgrounds. Our first college show was January 1997, University of Chicago, co-sponsored by the South Asian Student Association, the Organization of Black Students, the Latin American cultural student groups, and the Persian Cultural Society. And the fact that, first of all, we could,
Mm.
do an event that these four groups wanted to co-sponsor together, and then for everybody to walk away saying, ah, that reflected me, you know. It's just a beautiful thing. It's a privilege.
The resonance, like to be for both you and your group and everyone involved in experiencing it to be seen in a way or to be felt like you were seen and belong.
Yes, to be seen, to be heard, to be affirmed. Absolutely.
Yeah, beautiful. It's such a healing space.
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that we have many healers in the band, nurses, physical
Oh,
therapists,
yeah.
ophthalmologists, energy healers, it feels every time we play a show, it feels like yeah, and again, I don't want to sound overblow what we're doing or anything, but I'm just saying what it feels like. It feels like a cleansing when we play. And the kind of connection that happens with an audience it feels pretty special.
It's amazing. Well, I can't wait to come out to a show.
Yeah, you got to.
Yeah, I know. I don't know why I haven't been yet, but, thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious, Rahul, where are you now in your journey of yourself and of
Oof.
life? Aside from these pieces of artistry.
Mhm. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I turned 50 this May. So,
Oh, wow.
thinking a lot about where I've been and where I'm heading. So, I am married. I have two children, a 10th grade daughter and an 8th grade son. We moved to Evanston 3 years ago and really enjoying being a part of the community here, in particular, seeing my children find their place. So, there's a lot
Mm,
of meaning for me in seeing my children follow their passion and
mhm.
and my life partner and I staying close to what we are passionate about, what gives us meaning. So life is really good, and I think it's become more and more clear to me. We haven't really talked about this, but last few years really that integration of healing and work that needs to be done around diversity and social justice, inclusion, equity, and music have been coming together in a very meaningful way for me.
Merging.
Yeah. So
Mm,
it started with
beautiful.
the band playing I insisted that the band play the Multicultural Summit, which is APA's all the big wigs in the field of multicultural psychology. They had put together this
Oh,
conference every other January, and I went to one in Seattle. My colleague Charles Davis, Dr. Davis, told me about this conference that I should be going to, and the first one I went to, I was just blown away by it, and so I was like, they have this part of it called the Elders Ceremony, where instead of calling it a Lifetime Achievement Award, felt like this is so much more of a culturally meaningful way of honoring people's achievements. So it's called the Elders Ceremony. And was just blown away by that ceremony. So much so that when I found out that the conference was in New Orleans 2 years later, I just lobbied the heck out of the conference organizer saying, "We need the band to come down there, and we'd be honored to
mm,
play multicultural drums for the elders ceremony." So I ended up doing something I never do, which is take a lot of my own money and fly the band out there because it's hard with the budget that they had. We did a cultural recovery concert at the House of Blues, but still, it was a lot of money in the hole. So I was like,
Yeah,
that was a gamble, but
but it was that meaningful.
it was meaningful. And they were honoring that year Daryl Dwing Sue, Charles Silverstein, Bonnie Strickland, AJ Franklin, Janet Helms, Florence Denmark. And I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted the band to march with our multicultural drums, announce the elders, and bring them all into the main hall of like 600 people. And then we were going to line up on the
Mm.
side and do a cultural rhythm every time one of them was being honored. So of course, I it was clear to me what we're doing, but these folks were like, "Wait, what's going on? What's happening?" So all of a sudden, they're being shuffled
Right.
into a boiler room closet, and and these are people that like I use in my the classes I teach. I'm like, so and a couple of them are looking kind of annoyed, like, "Why are we standing here with these drummers, and, what are we waiting for?" 'Cause I was like, "No, no, they can't be seen until they get announced and da da da." And then finally, Daryl Dwayne
Mhm.
Sue, the literally the godfather of the work on microaggressions, first I'm whispering to the musicians, like, "That guy over there, that's week 3 of my class. That's what I teach during week 3." And then
Well, yeah, I was just thinking
and
that. I was
then
like, I think I know that from
right,
one of your classes
right.
or something.
And Daryl Dwayne Sue, finally kinda says, What are we doing here anyway?" And I just whisper sideways, "He's week 7." And, so I explain everything, and then the whole thing was such a hit that the president of the American Psych Association, James Bray, comes up to me. He's like, "We gotta have breakfast tomorrow." And over breakfast the next day, he says, "I
Oh.
need your band to set the tone for the APA convention, next year." So
Ooh.
he flew
Oh,
APA
yeah.
flew us out to do the opening ceremonies in Toronto, and then 2 years later, Dr. Melba Vasquez, invited us to do the opening ceremonies in DC. So my head exploded officially by, those 2 worlds coming together. And ever since then, Candace, it's been really, how do we use experiential multicultural drumming and other arts modalities as vehicles for having much needed difficult dialogues on various topics. So, just over a year ago, for example, there was a domestic violence conference. It was actually for practitioners that work with male batterers and agencies that work with batterers in Michigan. And 180 people at the conference. It was in Detroit, and we end up
Mhm.
doing this workshop, an experiential plenary where I'm addressing 180 people. And the similar question you asked me, like, what have you guys learned? It's me talking about what the band has learned over our decades together and how it translates to the learning objectives of the conference. And what I said though is like, well, instead of telling you what we learned, we want you to experience it. The only catch is
Mhm.
it took us 21 years and we're only giving you an hour. But
Yeah.
but what we did was we had the
Yeah.
4 drummers of the band, the 4 rhythm ambassadors, take each group of 35 people. In fact, I took a 5th group with tambourines and cowbells because you could never have enough cowbell. And
Yeah.
so you 35 people are gonna go, with Carlos, and he's gonna teach you the Latin clave rhythm. You 35 people are gonna learn the Brazilian samba rhythm. You 35 people are gonna learn the West African lamba rhythm, and you 35 people are gonna learn the North Indian Bhangra rhythm. And what we're gonna do is after 15 minutes, we're gonna collect all the groups into the big room, and we're gonna try to create the Indo-Afro-Caribbean rhythmic connection. And it was
Mm.
amazing. It was, people came together. I have a video of it on YouTube, and it was just an incredible experience. And the best part was me standing there in a room full of exhilarated folks, asking the question, "What did you experience?" And I wasn't
Oh,
asking for one-word responses, but the crowd just started giving one-word answers like joy, diversity, hope, empowerment, all of these words that they were just, feeling from the moment. And then I got back to the podium and put up a few slides and was able to connect what they were saying and what the experience was to some of the ingredients, like the chai recipe and the different things that we have reflected on over the decades.
I can see how that's a huge cleanse.
Yeah.
It's like the group cleanse within the experience, and that just opens up. Mhm.
Absolutely, absolutely, and then in the afternoon, we did smaller group sessions. I mean, it was still maybe 30 people, and this is where I integrate what I do with the band and our own style of doing things with a protocol that I got trained on, which is called Health Rhythms by Remo Drums, where they really sort of brought together the best of practices in facilitated drum circle movement work, as well as what music therapists have been doing for decades. So imagine being in a circle, everyone has a drum, and you say, "Can you share your name? And do you mind showing us what your name sounds like on the drum?"
Oh,
And then as a facilitator, you ask after they drum their name, "Do you mind if the group drums your name with you?" So right from the
yeah.
get-go, just that exercise, and as a facilitator, and a musician, I just loved learning this protocol because what a beautiful way of a sonic affirmation of every person's identity.
Yes.
And then there's the whole element of like the neuropsychological processing that goes beyond just using your intellect, drumming together.
The mirroring, the resonance. Yeah.
Yes, so much happening.
And when someone's drumming to what you created,
Exactly.
what you shared of yourself. Wow. It reminds me of something that's been very healing for me is tuning into either my own or a piece of my ancestor that I perceive
Mm.
what their soul song is or what my soul song is. And however that sounds or what my soul dance is, like with the movement that might come through that really speaks to me. And I love this exercise with the drums, with your name. It's beautiful.
Whoa, that's so cool. Candace, I'm gonna have to steal it. I
Go
love
for
it.
it. I might steal yours as well.
All right. Right, of course. Hey, man, there's that phrase in the blues, if you like it, steal it.
Exactly. And you know what? I was thinking you might I know it kinda sounds stupid, but you might be starting to call your drum circles
Drum use. Ooh,
drum U's,
yeah.
like the U shape, but
All
then it
right.
sounds a little awkward, right?
No, no, I'm
I'm just
already
teasing,
I'm already playing it. No, I like it.
trying to figure it
Um,
out.
yeah, I'm trying to figure that one out. But no, that sounds great. After reading that article, it made me think of instead of drum circles, absolutely the drum use, which leaves an open space. And also,
Yeah.
I the last multicultural summit I went to in January, there was an indigenous woman that was talking about indigenous practices in Canada, and
Mhm.
she was and healing work, and she was talking about how important it is to not just be face to face with somebody, to sort of be adjacent to somebody for a couple of reasons. One is to allow yourself to not necessarily absorb entirely another person's energy, but always to remind
Mhm.
yourself that there's you, the other person, but there's the earth that's holding the two of you. And so that you kind of
Oh,
almost goes along with that notion of like, we're not just enclosed in this circle, but there's that sort of acknowledgement of that fourth side or whatever, however you want to describe that.
yeah. I love that, especially the earth that's holding you as that resource that's always there, the connection.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
So I told you that one exercise just real quick. The
Mhm.
I was able to do a workshop with some colleagues and artist friends of mine for YWCA, where it was the theme was reimagining racial justice, and we did a drum circle format, and I incorporated some of this. work, um, some of the Remo health rhythms protocol, some of what the band members do and what they bring to the table. And being in a space where you're playing music together and also being insistent, in terms of the facilitation
Mm.
questions about our own growing edge around issues of oppression, about parts of ourselves that, are still hung up on aspects of this work that are underworked or that we really need to work on. To me, it's
Mhm.
so powerful, that phrase breaking bread together. So, a different analogy is like, when you make music together and then you're more open and then you have these
Mhm.
conversations. It's been my experience that we can go a lot further when we have opened things up in this way and we've played together musically. It still it requires, I think, some heavy duty facilitating because, somebody still might not say they might still might say something or do something that's really ignorant, or like have a part of them that's really dealing with some hateful, ignorant stuff. But
Mhm.
creating a space where we can address that, I think, is really important. And I appreciate, what the drums do in that setting when we do it with a lot of care.
I really appreciate that you're highlighting this and how you're bringing that experience to so many places. It makes so much sense to bring a coming together experience that anyone can access, a language we can all feel into, and then going into the harder thing gives so much more grounding and resource to the thing you want to perhaps tackle together that might be more uncomfortable.
Exactly. But again, Candace, it goes back to the humility and the accountability and the mutual accountability where
Mhm.
if I truly am living by that notion of like, it could be you calling me out on another issue. It's not coming with this holier than thou. Like, yeah, I mean, I
Mhm.
often find myself that I've thought about certain things a lot longer and harder than other people have. But when I think of all the jackass things I've said and done, and still, and painful reminders that it's an ongoing process for me, it's hard for me to feel genuine in saying, well, here I am, the expert, and you need to tune up,
Yeah.
and that's the end of the story. You know, is there a way we can
Right.
be insistent with and if somebody's going to put up their walls of defensiveness, hostility, shame, other forms of resistance, that's on them. But I'm going to let them know that I'm coming at them with a great deal of respect. But again, insistence at the same time.
Well, it just makes me think about the idea that if we disconnect from parts of ourselves, like a past self that has been a jackass or whatever, or maybe has been
Hmm.
ignorant, or even parts of ourselves now, and just go from one part of ourselves, we can be really arrogant
Absolutely.
or holier than thou, as you said, but if we are embracing of all, if we can, of many parts as we can, it's like, how can you possibly come with disrespect or feeling better than someone else? Because we're all human. We've all been there in some way, in some format.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for sharing today. I love hearing that you're from Michigan. I'm from Michigan too. I don't
Woohoo.
know if you knew that. Yeah.
Where in Michigan?
I grew up in Rochester.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so in some ways we've had a similar crossover of immigration
Hmm.
to Michigan, and the feeling of it would have been cooler to be born somewhere else. I can resonate with that too. But now that I know you're from Michigan, it's even better to be from Michigan.
Hey,
But yeah. Well, is there anything else you want to share today? Is there anything else that's bringing you alive right now?
I think this is it. Maybe if you don't mind, while you're rolling the credits, haha, with this audio podcast, I'll maybe
Yes, please.
just play another short something.
I'd love that. Yeah, I'm just gonna sit and listen and then credits can roll later if we want it to cross over.
That sounds great.
Or silence might be great with it.
Right.
Hmm.
Listen, thank you so much, Candace. It was really it was so much fun talking to you.
It was so much fun talking to you too, and thank you for all the wisdom you shared and just your energy, and I appreciate you. Thanks.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I love these questions that Rahul is asking. How can we insist on belonging? How can we create more spaces where we can bring more of ourselves? And what do we do to have the difficult conversations? How can we play with it and connect on different levels? Thank you so much for joining us today. And I want to thank Rahul for bringing his life and his sitar and his music and the beauty in him and sharing that with us today. It's truly a special thing to be able to invite my teachers on the show because they have influenced me. Just being in their presence gives me an energetic download of new information, of love, of new ideas and ways of being that I've taken in along the way. So I thank Rahul for that and for being part of my own journey. I appreciate you joining us to connect in on this beauty and to enjoy this with me. It's such a treat to have this music on the show, and I hope you enjoy this tail end of the show where we just spotlight Rahul's music in this improvisational, creative, lively moment. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. And if you'd like to know more about the podcast or receive self-love notes and newsletters and information from me, feel free to connect up with me on my website at candicewu.com/embody. See you next time on the Embody podcast.